I am delighted to be here today for some personal reasons that will emerge in my remarks, and also because I love the story of the ongoing renaissance of Detroit. I come here periodically, and every time I come here, something new is blooming, and most importantly, the spirit and of the people and the love of this place is always apparent. So congratulations to you. We're going to jump into this because there's a big fat clock here telling me I have 38 minutes and 56 seconds. So let's go into, and I've heard a lot about this crowd, how wise you are. So we're going to start with a test. You got your breakfast. Your minds are working. This is open book now. The chamber president kind of gave you a little hint, but you can consult your neighbors as you answer this question. How many of you in this room believe that where a person starts out in life should not determine where they end up? Da 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 da. Raise your hands. Let me see. Da da. This is a brilliant. I was told you were brilliant. That's true. Of course, there's something called the American dream, and the American dream is grounded in the fact that everyone should have the chance to get to a better place than the place at which they were born. That's what we believe. That's the myth that for so long has been the reality in this country. Whoops, this is a little sticky, isn't it? But sadly, as we heard our chamber president say, that American dream is not the reality. And some of you may have awakened a couple of years ago, looked at the front page of the newspaper, and seen a map that looks something like this. This is a variation on a map that appeared on the front page of the New York Times, and it depicts in graphic form data from something called the Equality of Opportunity Project, which Professor Raj Chetty and his colleagues now at Stanford undertook. It's a longitudinal data analysis looking at where virtually every child born in the United States in 1980 ended up on the income distribution 32 years later in 2012. And where this map is red, this map shows the chances that a child born to parents in the bottom fifth of the income distribution could get to or above the 60th percentile of the income distribution. So essentially moving from poverty or near poverty to the solid middle class. Now, if odds were even, the chance of moving from the bottom 20% to at least the 60% line or above on the income distribution would be a 40% chance. Those would be even odds. But if you look at these indicators, and I put Detroit on here as well as the region from which I come, you see that in Detroit, as well as other cities like Cleveland, really all of these major cities, the chance of someone rising from the bottom 20% to the solid middle class is significantly lower than what even odds would predict. It's about 15% likelihood of rising in Detroit. It's about the same in Raleigh-Durham, where I come from. This is not a picture of an American dream grounded in equality and equity. It says that the opportunity to move forward, looked through the lens of this longitudinal data study, is deeply, deeply place-based, and that zip code matters to opportunity. That's why we're here today, is to figure out how we can so arrange the institutions and systems in Detroit and this metropolitan area so that the odds of rising from the bottom to the middle class are much fairer and much more equitable. Let's look at some numbers here. And I've got colleagues at work who I call the young'uns. They are people in their 20s who like to play with data. I am not in my 20s, and I don't like to play with data. You can see one, you can infer the other. They put together this wonderful chart that looks at communities that have been ranked as best for business in terms of business climate and job prospects by Forbes magazine versus the data from the Equality of Opportunity Project. The Forbes Best for Business data, where one is best and the numbers go down from there, is one indicator. The mobility, that second column, the metrics are reversed. Seattle, which is number one for mobility, is the place where, under the Equality of Opportunity study, it was easiest for a person born in the bottom 20% to rise to the top 20%. And the second column in mobility, which is ranked 1 for best to 100 for worst, ranks the 100 largest cities in the United States by that factor. So you see that a place like Raleigh-Durham, where I live, has a very vigorous business climate and, in fact, has grown. But that has not translated automatically into successful upward mobility. In fact, Raleigh-Durham ranks 6th from the bottom of the 100 largest cities for mobility. Look at a place like Seattle, and we all like to think about Seattle, the wonderful Emerald City. Something is going on there. Whatever the way they have constructed their economy and the pathways to success, that place is contributed by a vigorous business climate, and it translates into the best mobility prospects for people born at the bottom. We've put Detroit here, challenges on the business climate with respect to the Forbes index. But out of 100 of the 100 largest cities in the United States, congratulations, you're better than my new hometown of Raleigh-Durham. But Detroit ranks 85 out of 100, where 100 is the low mark on mobility. So again, mobility matters, and an economic climate that's positive of and by itself, according to these data, will not automatically produce uplift, and it won't automatically reduce poverty. So we've got to engineer a different set of solutions if mobility matters. And we've heard from the very start here that we've got to think hard about how we undo what I call intergenerational stickiness at the bottom of the income distribution. That is not good for societies, for the economy, or for our future. So let's take, this is a bit sticky, another look. This is another graphic depiction of economic mobility in Detroit. And I want you to look at the far left column. That indicates where young people born in the bottom, to parents in the bottom 20%, ended up in the Equality of Opportunity study 32 years later. And what you see is this intergenerational stickiness at the bottom. If you were a child born to parents in the bottom 20% in Detroit in 1980, you had a 36% chance of ending up in the bottom 20% yourself. Even odds would have been 20%. That red line points out where median income would fall on each of these quintiles of birth. And what this essentially says is, if you were a child born at the bottom, to parents in the bottom 20%, there'd be almost a 70% chance that you would not get to the median income level. That suggests that there's something going on that is fundamentally restricting opportunity and pinching or squeezing the native talent that exists in every population. Really, you don't get to something close to parity where the odds of getting to the middle are even until you get to children who are starting out in the middle class. So we've got to figure out a way how we can build our education systems, connect those with economic development so that people born at the bottom have a chance to get to the middle and to the top. Now, I'm a bad guest. I've given you very bad news right after breakfast. That is rude. I'm a Southerner. You don't do that. So I'm now going to give you some good news. And this is really why we're here. How do mobility outcomes change with a post-secondary credential? So here's the magic. These are the prospects for people born in the bottom 20% of the income distribution, if they do not get a post-secondary credential, here defined because of the database as a 4-year degree, and if they do. These are from, again, a longitudinal data set looking at the entire U.S. population developed by the Pew Charitable Trust. Look at this. This is really what you want to focus on. Someone born in the bottom 20% who does not get a post-secondary credential, here defined as a 4-year degree, has in this national data set almost a 50% chance of not moving out of the bottom 20%. But look what happens if that same person gets a post-secondary credential. The chances of 50% odds of being stuck at the bottom drop to 10%. Now, I don't know how much you look at data, but I've seldom seen a more compelling statistic of the difference that a post-secondary education can make in the lives of someone, of people born at the bottom, than this particular statistic. And you can see that a post-secondary credential fundamentally changes the odds at each stage for a person born at the bottom. A post-secondary degree doesn't simply allow individuals to beat the odds. It can fundamentally change the odds of success and upward economic mobility for people born at the bottom. And that is why what Detroit Drives Degrees is doing today is of existential importance. Existential importance. So let's look at the other end. Your chamber president talked about retention and connection to work. These are family supporting wages in the Detroit MSA using data from MIT and the Living Wage Index. The median hourly earnings and the living wage in the Detroit Metro in 2015. Median hourly earnings for all occupations, half or above and half or below in this metro region, are $22. What one adult with one dependent child needs to earn on an hourly basis to get to be able to pay their household expenses and have a small amount of savings is just about at that level. It's slightly more. So a person with one dependent child, single person, adult working alone, needs to get to that median in order to be able to have a living wage existence. 37% of the jobs in Metro Detroit pay at or above that median. But look at the bottom. 74% of the jobs that pay at the median require a post-secondary degree or credential, exactly what we heard at the beginning. So the only way someone can get to that living wage, median wage, is to get a post-secondary credential. That is the key to the jobs that currently exist in this metropolitan area. This chart simply discloses how that plays out, how degrees translate into income. And what you want to focus on here is this kind of lime green band. That is the percentage of jobs that pay at least that median wage organized by credential. And you see that it's not until a person acquires an associate's degree or some equivalent or further advanced credential that they get solidly into the hourly earnings band that allow them to have a living wage existence. So again, this notion of credentials unlocking living wage work, it's evidently clear here, and the consequences of not getting there can be seen in this red band. If you don't have a formal educational credential, the likelihood is that your earnings will not get you anywhere near that median required to have a living wage existence. Here's what a profile looks like of educational attainment for Detroit City, and you see it's highly racialized, and particularly people of color do not have those liberating post-secondary credentials that are so essential for upward movement. I think you know that, and that's why our work has to work especially with historically disadvantaged populations. One of the key factors in the equality of opportunity study that most contributes to upward mobility is what the researchers called local school quality. And by that they meant the percentage of students who are in high poverty schools where 75% or more of students are eligible for free and reduced priced lunch. This chart shows the percentage of students by poverty level in this metropolitan area. And again, you see over half of African American students in this metro area are in those kind of high poverty schools. My mother was the principal of what was one of the most challenged elementary schools in Washington, D.C. It is highly possible to get an excellent education in a high poverty school. I want to say that right out. But it is unlikely that that high poverty school will be a successful launching pad for students, unlike a school where the population is more economically mixed. And the population of high poverty schools across this region, as in my region, is a problem for upward mobility, for the starting point of upward mobility. And here's, sadly, what the proportion of students in Detroit City in high poverty schools look like. So if we think about this continuum, the continuum that your chamber president showed you, from K through 12 through post-secondary into the workplace and advancement in the workplace, making sure the K through 12 launching pad is as strong as possible and not characterized by high concentrations of enduring poverty must be part of that solution. Now, those are the data. You can either wake up or go to sleep, whatever your predilection was, while the data were being shown. And now we're going to tell a little story. We started with mobility. And everybody, every family has a mobility story. And my mobility story involves two people. They're called Lillian and Norris, and I'm going to briefly tell you their mobility story. Lillian's grandfather, Stanton, was a slave born in Virginia in the mid-19th century. He tried unsuccessfully to escape from slavery twice and was recaptured. And on the third time, his mistress, realizing that he had an indomitable desire to get free, allowed him to buy his freedom. He found his way to the Underground Railroad and ended up across the river in Chatham, Ontario. And there he used his skills as a brick mason and a carpenter to build a business. He started a family. One of his sons went to Wilberforce University, the first in the family to go to college, and Lillian, his first granddaughter, got that spirit from her family and community of drive and the indomitable will for a better life, found her way to Fisk University and HBCU in Nashville. This is her graduation picture, class of 1910, and she got her freshly minted degree and went to the Silicon Valley of the early 20th century, a place called Detroit, Michigan, and began to teach school and to inspire other people with her example. Norris grew up as the grandson of a free man of color who migrated to Washington, D.C., where Norris's family established itself. He was very fortunate. There was a high school in Washington called Dunbar High School, the first high school in the United States built explicitly for African American students. And because of the nature of opportunity in the early 20th century, most of the faculty at Dunbar had advanced degrees from very good colleges because the economy did not allow them to use their higher education credentials in any other setting. So Dunbar High School was a crucible for the spirit of college going. Norris wanted to go to a very good college, but the teacher said, you need a little more preparation than even we can give you. And they used their social networks to help him get to a place called Phillips Exeter Academy, the oldest boarding school in the United States. He went there for a year, polished his skills, and then he applied and got into a little place called the University of Michigan. And he worked his way through Ann Arbor by being a cook on the train between Washington and Detroit every summer. He got his degree in chemistry. He came into Detroit. He met the fair Lillian. They got married, and I wouldn't be here had it not been for Detroit. So that is my family's mobility story. It's a story of drive. It's a story of opportunity. It's a story of luck. It's a story of several things. Here are the factors that made upward mobility possible for Lillian and Norris in a time when it was extremely rare for African Americans. As Lawrence said, my ancestors and their forebears were blessed with an extraordinary sense of personal drive, and that's enormously important. They were benefited from a culture of aspiration and urgency within their families and communities. Everything drove them to want to be in a better place. Very often, a brutal and intolerable situation at birth created that sense of urgency. They benefited from launching pad institutions that developed in them confidence and skill, whether that was Fisk University, explicitly built to be a launching pad, or Dunbar High School or Exeter. Those places were designed for pushing students to capture their potential in a challenging world. And there was the benefit of an economy that did generate opportunity if people had a credential. So a combination of personal drive and structural factors enabled their upward mobility. But why were they so unique? Why were they what W.E.B. Du Bois called the talented tenth? And why didn't the balance 90% have the same success that Norris and Lillian were able to acquire? What was missing? The society had no prevailing commitment at all to racial justice and equity. It was rigorously and viciously segregated. There was a weak infrastructure of opportunity. The systems did not exist to provide systematic uplift for large numbers of people. There was a fundamental absence of intentionally designed launching pad institutions available to people of color, as well as to Caucasian immigrants and newcomers at that period of time in America. There was no supportive public policy that made success and advancement a universal condition. And there were other factors that you no doubt can name, and I encourage you to think of. So Norris and Lillian survived and prospered because of the luck, the drive, and the foresight of people who laid the foundation of launching pad institutions. But the fact that those conditions were not universal, particularly the systemic ones, meant that 90% of the people in similar situations never got past that bottom 20% that we started our discussion with. So I want to let you take a few minutes to think about your own family's mobility story. Just turn to your neighbor and just begin to talk briefly. We've got a little time to do this. What were the on-ramps and launching pads that helped your family access the path to opportunity? Everybody here has a mobility story. What allowed you to be in this room able to read, write, think, compute, have a vision of your own success that you could realize? What were the headwinds that made it difficult for your family or you to stay on the path to opportunity? And what policies and programs helped your family face those headwinds, and what wasn't available? Talk among yourselves, and let's just sort of see what thinking about your own mobility begins to ignite in your own thinking. Okay. Ding, 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 da, 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 da. Your time is up. Ding, 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 ding. All right, folks. Detroit is out of control. Detroit is a fit. What have you done? You feed these folks. They get out of control. That's pretty wild. Okay. This is always a pretty, I hope you were talking about these questions. You were talking about something because it got pretty animated in here. Let's just take a few seconds. What were some of the insights that emerged as you talked? What were some of the on-ramps or factors that allowed mobility to happen in your families? Yes? World War II. What? So the traumatic and life-focusing experience of being at war, and as you say, the GI Bill, which was, how many of you talked about the GI Bill or some other accelerating public policy? Yeah, a big factor in the success trajectory of many families. What were some of the other things that you? Just shout it out. Just immigration policies, family, a sense of community. Family, say about family structure. What is that? Talk to me about family structure.
So my background is similar to yours, except it was my great grandmother who was born in 1895, went to boarding school, went to college in Atlanta, came to Detroit. But the difference between your story and mine is that when she came to Detroit to get a teaching job, she couldn't because she was black. So she basically, in boarding school, she was trained as an organist and as a pianist. So that's how she provided her family.
So early on in your family, these launching pad institutions created a momentum and endowed your family with skills. So anything else we've talked about family, public policy, community colleges. So those launching pad institutions intentionally designed to connect and lift people to the acquisition of a post-secondary credential. So intentional design. I love this idea of launching pad institutions. And we used to have them. Society used to proliferate, and we urgently need them again. What were some of the headwinds that you encountered, if you talked about the headwinds? Okay. This is fast, so because I've got 7 minutes and 51 seconds, but you got 15 seconds to speak about politics, sir. Pardon me? Okay. So what I would call is there was a culture of respect and inclusion that recognized people as assets and wanted to make sure they were incorporated into the opportunities that were being created. And that's a culture that's enormously important. So I encourage you to think about this, because these enabling conditions and disabling factors are present today. And as we try to build the intelligent design of pathways and systems, we have to pay attention to these tangible and intangible factors that made success possible for our forebears and for us, and need to be replicated again. So I'm a little ahead of myself here. Okay. So I think we've seen from our own examples that the path to possibility and mobility can be variable. The prospects for young people are widely variable in our society, depending on the circumstances of birth, which we can't control, the inclusiveness of our communities, the dynamism of the economies in which people function, and the quality of the workforce systems and their degree to be launching pads. So how do we make these enabling factors present and consistent in the lives of young people who are born at the bottom of the income ladder? That, to me, is the design question. How do we make these factors that we have talked about and that we know from our own experience are necessary for forward movement? How do we make those present in the lives of every young person, consistently present for people who are born and stuck at the bottom? That is the question. At MDC, we work on this engineering of what we call pathways to success. And they've got several stages. First of all, as we've seen, it's essential that students complete a rigorous and strong preparatory education, K through 12. That needs to be composed of a rich educational experience, deep support, and also, as early as possible, exposure to the labor market, and we think work-based learning is particularly important. That early education has to proceed seamlessly into the next band. It's interesting how our three bands that we saw earlier when the president spoke are replicated here. We did not co-conspire. The middle section is this important formative launching pad to obtain a post-secondary credential with a meaningful educational dimension, strong support services, and opportunities to integrate work and learning. I think that's just enormously important to give people, particularly less advantaged people, a taste of work as they learn. And then once entry into the workplace happened, that third domain of success. To enter and to advance requires on-the-job experience, again, deep support, and a culture of professional development. That's how we rise up. Now, this infrastructure of opportunity, these pathways, exist in an ecosystem. And this is where the work gets tough. If you look across the top of this chart, you'll see 5 factors: residential segregation, income equality, local school quality, family structure, and social capital. These were the 5 factors that the Equality of Opportunity study found were most highly associated with the failure to move up from the bottom. To the degree that young people were living in neighborhoods that were racially, educationally, and occupationally segregated, they did not move forward. To the degree to which there was a wide gap between the bottom 20%'s income level and the next rung in the ladder, progress was compromised. To the degree that local public schools were high-poverty schools and inadequate launching pads, mobility suffered. To the degree that young people were growing up in families where there was a single earner in a 2-earner economy, mobility suffered. And perhaps most importantly, when young people grew up in communities where social capital, where the networks by which we get information and clues about what the pathway to success even looks like, where social capital was weak, mobility suffered. So as we work to build these pathways, and our work really is heavily focused on these circles, we have to take into account the disabling factors that are in this, what we call the ecosystem cloud. If you don't have transportation systems, how will we get to the educational experiences we're working so hard to create? If the criminal justice system disqualifies people from seeking and attaining certain occupations, mobility is compromised. So as we work on the engineering of the pathway, it has to be with profound attentiveness to the ecosystem factors that can either propel success or make it very difficult for people at the bottom. So I want to leave with you a notion of the infrastructure of opportunity, which I think is what you're building through Detroit Drives Degrees and through your collateral efforts. This is what we try to help communities put in place through MDC. The infrastructure of opportunity is about building those systems and supportive ecosystem factors so that a larger percentage of the population can get beyond the bottom to the middle class. What does that require? Commitment to a common vision that what we're aiming for is family supporting work that can be the reality for more people in our communities. Good planning that requires the engagement of all parts of the system, particularly employers and higher education and young people themselves in designing educational experiences. Deep employer engagement, a culture that assumes the potential in everyone, and asset orientation when it comes to thinking about who is capable of what. The commitment and the courage to reallocate resources toward things that work and away from things that don't. And the presence of catalytic investment that often comes from philanthropy to get the ball rolling. That's what we need to practice. Now, how many of you have read this wonderful new book, The Underground Railroad, by Colson Whitehead? And do any of you know that? It's the story of resilience and courage of of a young slave woman who gets to a miraculous underground railroad that is in fact a railroad and wills her way to freedom. That is the infrastructure of opportunity in many ways. But this novel tells an important story. The groundwork, the tracks of the Underground Railroad had been laid, but there were no clear directions to tell Cora, the slave, how to navigate. So as we build the pathways, we also need to help people, particularly people born at the bottom, for whom the pathway may not be clear, understand how to navigate. That's critically important. None of us got to a better place on the income continuum simply by personal drive alone. A couple of weeks ago in the New York Times, 2 articles appeared, and they drove to the core of my existence, not in a good way. One was entitled, "Why Succeeding Against the Odds Can Make You Sick." And it was the story of John Henryism. What happens to people who use heroic personal efforts to prevail against the odds when the systems that undergird the culture are not supportive? It is toxic, and it can lead to failure, frustration, and in the case of the John Henry story, even death. In the same issue was a story of dream students, first-generation college students from undocumented backgrounds who were going to college and who said that the only way that we can win is to fight back. The fact that those 2 articles appeared in the same paper, and that here was a living story of people saying, in the absence of supportive systems, all we have is our own resolve to will ourselves to a better life. That made me deeply, deeply disturbed, because personal heroism alone is not the solution to persistence. Equity has to be the solution. And we have to make sure, as we design, that we are designing with the full supports that people need to be able to marshal their personal drive toward an end without making their own existence the sacrifice, the price of success. So, vigilant attention to equity is needed to assure that we get persistence to the holy grail of a living wage job with an enabling credential. And I'd leave you with this question. What aspects of this community's education system, practices, and culture, which aspects will attention to equity be needed as you implement Detroit Drives degrees? How will you pay attention to those ecosystem factors as you engineer the Underground Railroad that can deliver people to the promised land? And what does this mean for the leadership of each and every person in this room? 100 years ago, Detroit was the shining city on the hill for Norris and Lillian. Thanks be to God. And I think through your efforts, very, very soon, through Detroit Drives degrees, it can once again assume a lighthouse position in showing how we can build the American dream. Thank you.